Hello, welcome back to my channel where I discuss all things religious or spiritual. Today I'm going to be discussing Asherah, who's also known as the Great Mother. And in my last video, I did a brief introduction on her. But just to recap, Asherah is an ancient Canaanite deity who was worshipped by the ancient Israelites, as well as the Canaanites, obviously, alongside Yahweh and El Elyon. She is known as El's wife and consort. You can find some artifacts in ancient Israel that describe Asherah as being Yahweh's consort or being described as Yahweh's Asherah. And this does not mean that Asherah was married to Yahweh. In fact, if you watched my last video, you'll become aware of the fact that the Israelites combined the deity El Elyon and Yahweh and meshed them into one. And that's how we get some of the confusion around Asherah being the wife of Yahweh. So Asherah is a mother goddess of fertility, and she is also the mother of Baal. Now, church and religious leaders often credit Asherah to being the goddess of sex, and Baal being the god of child sacrifice. Both accusations are false and aren't based in history, and they are lies. You will not find any information on the internet, in a book, or anything regarding something like this. The only time you will hear something like this is from the church themselves. And they throw out these wild accusations like child sacrifice and orgies and stuff, and they do this on purpose because they're talking to a group of people who already have superstitions, who already have biases against any characters that contradict the Bible. So of course these people are not going to fact check any of this. You can pretty much tell these people anything. They're so scared of what they believe to be pagan, despite the entire Bible being of pagan origins, down to the very God of the Bible being of pagan origins, and titles such as El Elyon and El Shaddai, and even the lion being associated with Yahweh, most notably the Lion of Judah, is all pagan, as lions were first associated with Asherah prior to the Bible's existence. And just to be clear, I am super aware of what the term pagan means. It's religious people that actually don't know what pagan means, as paganism is a religion that stems from Europe, and it is very incorrect to call anything that's outside of the Bible pagan. People that are religious, most notably Christians, they do that a lot. And it's like the equivalent of a black person calling every race and ethnicity white or Caucasian just because they're not black. It's not correct. So I just want to note that I do understand the difference, but for the sake of the video and what people are familiar with, I will use the term pagan, and usually I am using it in like a ironic or sarcastic way just to show the hypocrisy of religious people. So with that being said, I said in my last video that the tree of life itself is of quote-unquote pagan origins, as it's a representation of Asherah and links back to her ancient worship honoring her as a fertility goddess, hence the tree of life. Asherah also held the title as Queen of Heaven. It's a term that was given to her by both Canaanites and Israelites. She's also referred to as such in the Bible in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18. And again in Jeremiah chapter 44, verse 17 to 18. This verse shows the reluctance to let her go, as the Israelites were scared of what would happen if they stopped worshiping her, showing and proving how significant she was amongst the ancient Israelites. Another example of there being a fear of Asherah can be found in 1 Kings chapter 18 verses 19, where the prophet Elijah gathers 450 priests of Baal and 400 priestesses of Asherah. He challenges them to a showdown to prove that Yahweh is the one true God, and this little challenge leads to the execution of the prophets of Baal. However, the priestess of Asherah were untouched. Queen Jezebel, who was a devout follower of Asherah, was told what Elijah did and threatened to kill him. Elijah ran away to the desert as he feared for his life. He was so scared that he even begged Yahweh to take his life. Now, despite there being instances where the biblical Hebrews feared Asherah, they still took part in the eventual dismantling of her temples and altars, completely destroying and dismantling them, setting them on fire, and etc. And her priesthood was also destroyed and killed. A reoccurring thing we see in Abrahamic religions is the convert or die method. And this method is usually credited to Christianity, Catholicism, and even sometimes Islam. But this concept came before Christianity and Catholicism. And this example can be proven with the book of Joshua. God commands the Israelites to conquer the land of Canaan, which involves the destruction of the Canaanite people who are seen worshiping other gods. So in Joshua chapter 6, verse 21, you can see on screen that God orders the Israelites to destroy every living thing that's in this city: men, women, children, babies, and animals. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1 through 2, God commands the Israelites to completely destroy the 7 nations that occupy the promised land due to their idolatries and sinfulness. Now, if you watched my prior video about the Canaanite ancestry of the biblical Israelites and God, then you know the irony of these verses. A God named Yahweh, who was originally and historically a Canaanite deity, who is the son of El Elyon and Asherah, and brother to Baal, who's originally a part of a culture and religious system where multiple gods are worshipped, now all of a sudden has a problem with multiple gods being worshipped and orders the people who were originally Canaanites, who decided to change themselves to Israelites, to kill an entire nation because they worship other gods. When you start to do the research beyond the Bible and look into history, these things start to look crazy. We then have verses like Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 12 to 16, where God provides a command for the Israelites to destroy any city amongst them that leads them into idolatry. And this command involves killing everyone in the city, meaning babies, children, animals, women, young men, old men, everyone. Other examples can be found in Numbers chapter 31, verse 1 to 2, or 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 2 to 3. Gruesome events like that would later set the stage for similar events to take place in the future, such as the Crusades, the Inquisition, King James, colonialism and missionary activity, and of course, slavery and colonization. And these are just a few examples. It really makes you question, did Yahweh tell the Israelites to kill everyone who doesn't worship him? Or was this just a patriarchal decision for control that tends to repeat itself throughout history? Now back to the Great Mother. Remember how I said that Asherah represents the tree of life? Well, so does the Hebrew menorah, which also symbolizes the tree of life, and traditionally it's lit by women every Sabbath. and also the Hebrew holiday Tu B'Shvat, which is the birthday of trees, which directly links back to ancient Asherah worship. And Jesus' mother, Mary, who's credited with being that of a divine mother who gives birth to a Savior son, well, this concept was already done centuries prior. And her ancient counterpart is none other than Asherah. And in order for this to make sense, I do have to do a lot of explaining, so please bear with me. So, Asherah's name is heavily associated with the sea, and her name translates to she who walks on the sea. So, a recurring theme that you'll see in the New Testament is water, baptisms, Jesus walking on water. And like I said, Asherah's name literally means she who walks on the sea. However, you're probably thinking, like, okay, what does all of this have to do with Mary? Well, I'll tell you. Mary's name has a lot of different variations, but all of these variations are very, very relevant as they were carefully picked, and it wasn't like some type of divine coincidence. This was intentional. Mary's original name appears in the original manuscripts as Miriam. Now notice how her name was purposely spelled with a Y-A-M in her name. If you watched my last video, then you know that Y-A-M, yam, is the Hebrew word for sea. In the Igbo language, Mamiri means Mamiwata spirits, who are heavily associated with living in the sea and fertility. And even the modern name for Mary links her to the sea. In Spanish, mar means sea, and in Latin, maris means sea. And even her Spanish name, Maria, still has to do with the sea. Or the English term, marine, is also related to the sea. One of Mary's ancient names, Stella Maris, translates to Star of the Sea. Do you seriously think any of this is a coincidence? Because I personally don't think so. I believe it to be a direct nod to Asherah. In the Caribbean, specifically Latin countries within the Caribbean, the Nigerian Orisha, Yemaya, is often associated with Mary. Yemaya is often depicted as a mermaid, as she is a Mamiwata spirit of the sea and is associated with fertility and motherhood. The African slaves often used Mary as a cover up when showing honor to Yemaya, and this is the same for a lot of the Orishas. They use the saints to cover up. And why did they do this? Because it was a convert or die method being placed upon them, where they had no choice. And just like in the biblical times, we had people killing others because they didn't worship who they wanted them to worship. And this is still an ongoing theme. But the Caribbean is not the only place where Mary can be known as a mermaid. In Greece, of all places, Mary is depicted as a mermaid. So think about it. Why? In Egyptian cultures, Asherah can also be known as Isis, who is also known as the Queen of Heaven, and sometimes known as the Lady of the Sea. Isis is also linked to fertility and motherhood, and she oversees the seas and harbors. Asherah and Yemaya can also be linked as either being the same goddess under a different name, or at least the same manifestation of energy, as Asherah and Yemaya are both mothers, and their son, Baal for Asherah and Shango for Yemaya, are both gods of thunder. Something Mary and Jesus mirror when it comes to these characters is definitely the divine mother and the savior son depiction. The same still goes for Isis and her son Horus. Depictions of Asherah or El Shaddai show her holding up her breast. Well, did you know that the priestess of Shango salute him by raising up their breasts, which is a direct nod to Asherah? Another counterpart to Asherah is her Mesopotamian/Babylonian version, who goes by the name Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, who is also known as the Queen of Heaven. And just like Asherah, lions are often associated with her. In this picture, she can be seen holding what's called a rod and ring, which is similar to the ankh that Isis holds. Inanna is another Mesopotamian goddess who is also known as Ishtar. And lastly, Astarte is a counterpart of Asherah. Astarte evolved from Ishtar. She is also the goddess of love and fertility. And guess what? She also has the title Queen of Heaven. In my opinion, these are all manifestations of the same goddess. Just different names depending on what region and what culture or what country you are from. They are all the same goddess. Different name, but at the core remains the same. The creation of the character Mary, in my opinion, was inspired by these goddesses that came before her, aka Asherah. And I know that I'm going to be told that I'm speaking blasphemy for saying that Mary was created and like, oh, how dare you, Mary was real. Well, I find it hard to believe that Mary was real due to the fact that there's no evidence that her name was actually Mary, for one, as the only evidence we have is the Bible. And when I say Mary, I'm also talking about her name Miriam and etc. When I say that there's no other evidence other than the Bible of her name being Miriam, I mean that her name could have been Stella or Sarah for all I know. Like, it could have been anything. However, the Bible states her name to be Miriam, and her name and every variant and every translation of her name all have to do with the sea. Also, her story, being a divine mother and giving birth to a savior, seems to mirror stories that predate the Bible by centuries upon centuries. Asherah and Baal, Isis and Horus, Yemaya and Shango. Down to the very meaning of what her name means, it seems to mirror that of Asherah. And I do not believe this to be an accident, as the Bible has historically been known for having many contradictions and many stories that seem to have been borrowed from Babylonian culture, Canaanite culture, and even Egyptian culture. And that's not where it ends. They borrowed a lot. Well, that's all I have time for today. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you come back to the next video. Toodles!